Welcome to this portion of the Delaware Valley University Women's Summit. I am super excited today to introduce Carlee Myers. For those who don't know, Carlee is an expert at helping female leaders think high achieving executives, business owners, and managers who feel overworked and exhausted, and she helps them find their peace and freedom that they desire. As the founder of the Stress Less company, Carlee has helped hundreds of professionals around the world take action to reduce stress through her educational and mentoring programs. She believes there is no one size fits all when it comes to stress management. Carlee has worked most recently and has been featured in media outlets such as Parade, Fox 29, Good Day Philadelphia, The Maui News, and Holy Magazine. Did I miss anything, Carlee, or is that good?
I don't think so. Thank you.
No, it was great. I was making sure I didn't miss anything. I know you have so much experience and so much value to add to this conversation about stress during uncertain times and just stress in general. So I wanted to make sure I said everything correctly because it was just like, so much experience. So with that being said, I'm just really happy for you to be here. For those who don't know who I am, so if you're wondering who I am, I'm Sarah DeGeorge, and I will be interviewing Carlee today. But she is the focal point of this, so nothing about me today and everything about Carlee. So with that being said, stress during uncertain times. Right now, I think uncertain times has been the phrase, unprecedented times, everything. I think it's been said enough times in the last 365 days. We're coming up on that soon, the 365 day anniversary. But I think the first thing I want to ask, is it might be something as simple as, a definition or whatnot, but like, what is stress? I think we all feel stress, but, we know what stress is, but do we know what stress is? So tell me, what is stress?
Yeah, I love that question as a starting point because we all can say the same word and mean something completely different. And there's actually like hundreds and hundreds of definitions of stress. Like the therapists, the psychologists, the stress management experts in the industry, like they don't all seem to agree on a singular definition. So this is a really great point to bring forward. So stress is actually going through all of those definitions, I found one that really resonate with me and resonated with the work that I do with my clients. And so the way that we define it at the Stress Less company is that it is a condition or feeling experienced when a person perceives that the demands exceed the resources they are able to mobilize.
Wow.
So the long definition, but really what it boils down to is the belief that we can't handle it or we don't have what it takes, whatever it is.
Wow. It's so funny when, again, it's just like, it becomes this long definition. And then when you kind of put it in like almost like this term that everybody can understand, it just makes a lot of sense because stress is just that moment where things just feel insurmountable. You're looking up at the top of the mountain and you're like, how am I going to get up there? And that's when you start to have the mental aspects of stress come in, the physical reactions to stress. And it's just, that makes so much sense. And just a nice little concise bit of words. It's just like, that's exactly what it is. But
and it varies from person to person. I think that what's really important about it is that, like, for instance, Sarah, you may say, I can't handle a certain situation, but another person would be like, what? That's so easy, or vice versa, right? And so it really depends on the individual's personal perception, because the stressor alone, or that thing alone, isn't enough. It has to be, the stressor plus the perception. That's what really stress is, the perception combined with the trigger, if you will.
That makes a lot of sense. And it is very individualistic for sure, because there are certain things that like, I don't really think anything of that somebody else is like, how do you do that? But then there are certain situations where just me visibly seeing it stresses me out, for myself very quickly. I don't have kids. So whenever I see a situation with, one of my friends that's a parent, I'm just like, oh my gosh, I am just so, and they're like, no, like, they're stressed out. I'm not negating that, but it's just a different kind of thing where, because I just see it as like, oh my gosh, you know, it's much different from me to them and everything like that. So.
Well, you know, a great example of that is for me, like kayaking or canoeing. So I don't know if like in a past life I've drowned. I don't like literally don't know where this has come from, but I have this like paranoia around kayaking and canoeing.
Oh.
I grew up, for context, I grew up in backcountry Maryland, and it was right by the Potomac River. And where I grew up specifically, there was about 5 or 6, maybe more dams. And so I would hear these stories about people going over the dams. So there's, you know, tales around like, don't do this, don't do that. You don't want to fall over a dam, right? And so I have always had this kind of conception, if we go, like I have a group of friends who want to go whitewater rafting or canoeing or kayaking, where I'm like, did you research the route? Where's it? What are we going to do? Do we have life vests? Do we have like, all of these things? Whereas my dad, his perspective is go opposite of the way the river's flowing and you will never fall down a dam. So you go opposite the way the river's flowing and then you float back. You will always know what's on the river and you will never end up going over a dam. But for me, it's like, what? No, I can't, right? That's perception for me. And for him, completely different perception. And to be fair, since I've learned that, my perception has changed. I really love kayaking, canoeing. But again, it's all stressor plus perception equals the actual stress experience.
I really love that kayaking statement from your dad. I'm going to remember that. But also kind of going on to maybe another discussion, but we don't have to touch on it. It's funny how then, like you said, something that with you having once been afraid, but now you love it, it kind of is like, that's also a kind of another discussion of stress and how it, you know, how you adapt and how your stress adapts to, you know, your perception again of the situation. At one point it was scary, and now it doesn't seem so scary because you've reached that peak, you know what I mean? You've kind of seen the other side and you're like, oh, well, this isn't so bad, you know?
That was it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. There are those things, you know, always those memes online, you know, pictures where they're like, oh, doing something that will literally take you 5 minutes, but you put off for 3 months because it was just super scary and stressful. And then once you were done, you're like, wow, that only took me 5 minutes to do. It's just so funny how stress works in that way. But I think the bigger story about all of this, and maybe a little bit more personal to you, is what was the catalyst of the Stress Less Company? You know, what happened in your life to just inspire you to devote your time to educating people about how to manage stress? And what is your personal experience with stress?
Yeah. So I always say when people ask me this, you just open a can of worms.
I'm sorry.
But no, it's a really important can of worms. So, you know, I actually ended up starting the Stress Less Company because of an experience I had when I was about 12 years old. So, when I was around 12, a man was actually murdered in my home and my mom was shot 3 times. So my mom ended up, you know, my parents ended up separating and my mom ended up dating what was soon to be a crazy ex-boyfriend. You know, as we do when we go through breakups, you know, when we feel ready, we start dating again. And so after the separation, my mom ended up dating this, we'll call him crazy ex-boyfriend. Oh, no. And then when they broke up, she ended up dating somebody new a few months later. And what happened was that ex-boyfriend never really let go. And so he broke into my childhood home, killed my mom's new boyfriend, and tried to kill my mom. So my mom, it was a freaking miracle, basically made a full recovery. If you saw her today, you would have absolutely no idea. I mean, really, like all she has is a pair of reading glasses and a slight limp. That's it. Yeah. So, I mean, she basically made a full recovery. So for everyone that was holding their breaths, you can let that sigh of relief out. Yeah. But, you know, while my mom basically made a full recovery, I ended up struggling for a really long time. Mm-hmm. Now, I struggled with the symptoms of PTSD, with stress, overwhelm, night terrors, jumpiness. I mean, you name it, I was probably struggling with it. And it took me a long time before I finally had the courage to open up and, first of all, tell people that I was having a hard time and share that I was struggling. And unfortunately, when I finally did open up, I would say things like, well, when I finally did open up, I would say things like, hey, I'm feeling a little stressed, or I'm kind of feeling overwhelmed, or I'm sort of struggling right now. And for me to say I'm sort of struggling, whoo, was that an act of courage? And so I finally would share things like that with people. And then I would ask for advice. And it was like clockwork. I got the same 5 or so responses every single time. You know, hey, Carlee, have you tried therapy? Have you tried meditation? Have you tried yoga? Have you tried changing your diet? When's the last time you hit the gym? Right. And for me, I was like, no, Sherlock, like, are you kidding me? Like, no, who do you think I am? This is basic stuff. Of course, I've tried those things. And I mean, really, I was so desperate for change. I felt like my mind was just like trying to tear me apart from the inside out. I was so desperate for change that I had tried all of that. And some of the stuff didn't work at all. I want to be totally real about that. Did not work at all. And some of the stuff worked a little bit, but nothing really ever got me over that hump where I was experiencing things like joy and silliness and goofiness and contentment and all of those beautiful states of mind that I knew I was capable of being in, that I really wanted to be in. And so for a while, I thought there was something wrong with me, right? Because these 5 things, like therapy, yoga, meditation, eating right, hitting the gym, and a few others, these kind of mainstream approaches, everybody else said that they were working, right? That they worked for them. So I kind of thought, well, what's wrong with me? Why isn't this working? Like, something's got to be wrong. I must be doing something wrong. I'm going to the wrong yoga class. I'm doing, whatever. And so I kept trying. I kept showing up and doing things that I knew that didn't work for me. And as a result, I ended up struggling for 10 years.
Wow. That's a long time to just continue to just not to carry all of that with you and not find that relief, that release, all of that. Wow.
Yeah. It's heavy. And 10 years from, my story, it felt like forever, but there are people out there that are going 20, 30, 40 years with kind of stuff like this. So I want to acknowledge those people.
Mm-hmm.
It took me 10 years of struggle before I finally figured out what worked for me. And I finally figured out the fact that there is no one size fits all when it comes to stress management. That is for sure. And in full transparency, once I figured out what worked for me, I then threw a temper tantrum. Because I was like, are you effing kidding me? Are you kidding me right now? Like, why aren't we talking about this? Why are we only talking about these 5 or so mainstream approaches? Why aren't we talking about the fact that there's no one size fits all? Why aren't we talking about the fact that, stressor plus perception equals the actual stress experience? So why aren't we talking about the perception and the individual stuff that's going on in here? Why aren't we talking about so many more things? And so spent a while throwing my temper tantrum about how society is screwed and nobody's doing anything and blah, blah, blah. And then I'm telling you, I was in my spoiled girl britches, like just so upset. And then I had this realization, and it was kind of one of those aha moments where I was like, oh crap. Like, I'm supposed to be the one that's talking about this. And it was kind of like that, kind of hit yourself, like, so, come on, I didn't see it before. But so I had that realization, and then that's how the Stress Less Company came about.
It's one of those things, and obviously it makes me sad, and like my heart hurts that all of those situations had to come and you had to go through that entire process. And of course, I think anybody that has dealt with stress has been given like those, that list of like, do this, have you decided to do a celery detox or whatever it is. And you're like, but if like, we are having this conversation that everybody is an individual. Why are we giving these kind of like one size fits all type approaches if we are super individualistic? If every single one of us has a unique fingerprint, shouldn't like that also be kind of like the idea of everything else about us, and why, you know, there isn't necessarily just one bit of advice? And like obviously I know everybody's well meaning and you know they know what they know, but you took this situation that, you know, was this event that then stayed with you, you know, throughout the years and, you know, all the different forms, and you turned it into something where you're now helping others in it, you know, with their stress, because you realize that there isn't a one size fits all, and you took your situation and you put yourself in the position to be that person. And that takes a lot of courage too. And, you know, it's a lot because you had carried all of this extra, I don't want to say baggage, but baggage on you. And then you're kind of like, you finally offloaded it, but then you're putting not new baggage on, but you're kind of putting this new process on your shoulders now to help others. And for me, that's very selfless of you, to be able to come out of that situation. And I'm truly inspired by your story as well. You know, it's just amazing. And you finding this kind of silver lining to all of this, and being able to share that with others and be able to support others through the Stress Less Company. I'm in awe, obviously. I can't say it. I'm gonna go on a tangent if I don't stop myself. But you told your story about how stress affected you, and I know it, again, I'm not trying to get a one size fits all kind of going on that, but like, how does stress typically affect the lives of others? Like, how does it, you know, how does it really manifest, and what does it do, if you don't mind me asking, like just in general, so that people can maybe understand how it is kind of creeping into their lives in a way that may affect certain aspects.
Yeah, so it's wild how much stress can impact a person. And I actually have a free download. I'll have to make sure that you have the link to give everyone, that shows you all the ways in which it can show up. But it's just to name a few, right? It can show up in terms of our mood and irritability, depression, anxiety. Stress can show up in our gut. It can cause indigestion. I don't know about you guys, and this may be too much information, but when I was in high school and playing sports and I was nervous before we would compete, I was always in the bathroom right before, right? That stress, that overwhelm of that. It can show up with heartburn. It can show up in, I don't know how many of us, like I know for me, like I get tension in my shoulders or in my back or somewhere in my body. And those are kind of the more, minus kind of the mental health stuff that I shared, you know, I think those are kind of more the minor symptoms. And I put that in quotes because it really depends on the person and the perception again, right? Mm-hmm. Minor kind of ailments that can show up when you're experiencing stress. And then you have the bigger picture stuff that we hear about all the time, the stuff that's really impacting us, which is the cardiovascular disease, heart attacks, strokes. I mean, I was just at a conference pre-pandemic. It was like early, like January 2020. And a woman on a panel that I was interviewing, I was in your shoes. And she shared that her husband, just a few weeks earlier, 40 years old, no prior symptoms, had a heart attack at age 40.
Oh my gosh.
Now, he luckily survived, but the when they asked the doctor, hey, why did this happen? How did this happen? And they said, look, you're just stressed. You need to manage your stress, right? So that can be, I mean, that's the bigger stuff that we hear about all the time, or maybe not so often stories like that, but we hear about the scary stuff all the time, and it can really impact the length of our life, our happiness. I mean, it actually even, believe it or not, impacts our reproductive systems. It can lower sperm counts. It can impact fertility rates. I mean, across the board, it's really impacting the body.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's not, you know, people think stress, there are the physical reactions to stress, and obviously a lot of the mental, you know, reaction to stress, cloudy mind, irritability, you know, everything that you just brought up, but people don't really realize the almost like biological, you know, effects of stress and how it really messes with all systems of your body in some way, shape, or form. And the more prolonged the stress is, just how damaging it can be. Like you said, I mean, even, you know, as much as, you know, reproduction. And it's kind of interesting because it is a stressful time, you know, during, you know, trying to conceive and everything, you know, and even being pregnant. And yet that can affect in itself. It's just like there's stress all around us in any situation. And it's how we manage it in a way that's kind of how we can preserve ourselves to the best of our ability. And I say that with understanding that some people can deal with stress, I don't want to say better, but in a different manner than others. So it's like,
well, it's all perception,
it's
right?
all perception, like, yeah.
It's, and I don't want to come away from this conversation, you know, painting stress with, you know, this horrible brushstroke, because stress can actually be a good thing.
Yeah. It's and there's actually stress, right?
Huh?
Is it eustress?
Eustress, yes.
I paid attention in health.
Yes. So there's two different kinds of stress. There's distress, which we've been really talking about up until this point, and then there's eustress, which stems from the word euphoria, you know, euphoric. And so distress is, you know, you're really putting that negative connotation to it, that perception. It's a stressor plus a negative perception equals kind of distress. And then eustress, now typically the way eustress works is that we unconsciously associate it with things like getting married, having a baby, getting that promotion, getting accepted into college, orgasms. I mean, these are all, throw that one out there, right? No, the way that these things all work is that they actually still create the physiological response, the raised heart rate, the sweaty palms, maybe sweaty armpits, you know, all of that. But we perceive it as a good thing. And so what actually happens when we choose the perception of this thing as good is that our blood vessels actually choose to do something a little bit different. So when we're experiencing distress, our blood vessels actually constrict. And so the blood's having trouble moving through the body. But when we view it as a good thing, they actually expand. And so it serves our body and helping us rise to the occasion physically. So it's really an interesting difference between the two.
Wow. I never actually knew that, you know, the actual physical, you know, what happens, you know, based on how, again, perception, you know, is this distress or is this eustress? Is this a good thing or is this, you know, not so good? And that's really interesting. And again, that kind of comes back to just how, you know, how you are looking at this situation and, you know, how your body then reacts. It's amazing.
Yeah. And what's really wonderful about it is that that's one thing that we have quite a bit of control over. Like even if we have, like I had like 10 years of just horrible perception of my experience, of stuff that was going on in my life. If one little thing went wrong, I was either snapping or whatever, right? My perception was off, but what was able to happen is once I realized it, I was able to retrain those neural pathways to, instead of automatically going to the negative perception, to automatically go to the positive assumption that this is something that would serve me. So a great example would be, you know, maybe a former version of myself would have said, like, if I lost a job, it would have said, oh my goodness, my life's over. How am I going to pay my bills? What am I going to do? What is my boss going to say if I put them down as a reference? Whatever. Like the thoughts would have gone on and on. And instead, perhaps today, my initial response would be, oh, thank goodness, I really didn't want to work for someone else. Anyway, I was meant to own my business and I get to, you know, release the shackles of that crappy boss. Or it may be, oh, great, another opportunity to figure out how to make money.
That is I mean, this like literally the same situation, but two completely different thought processes. And I feel like in a way through this discussion, it is a journey and we need to kind of like go through life and have experiences and understand circumstances a little bit better. It's, you know, it's one of those things where, you know, in hindsight, you can kind of see how point A led you to point B, which led you to point C, which, you know, sometimes may have led you back to point B. You know, it's not linear. Everything is all over the place sometimes in our life journey, but it's, you know, it's interesting how when we retrain those, you know, neural pathways to react to things a little bit different, it creates different kind of inner dialogue, which then kind of comes out then into the outside world and what's going on around you and how you're reacting to it.
Yeah, it's funny that you share that, because there's a definition of miracle, and I think it was probably founded in A Course in Miracles, which I don't honestly follow very closely, but the way that they define miracle is a shift in perception.
Huh.
And I actually really love that, because if we shift our perception, we then kind of subconsciously shift the way we're acting or the way we're showing up in the world, which then creates the physical miracle that oftentimes we think, like getting that dream job, or having the physiological, like telling our subconscious mind, telling our physiological bodies to heal from, I don't know, broken leg or whatever. But and that can go on one, you know, I'm not going to go on the extremes of that. Well, you know, is it true, is it not? But I love the perception. I love the definition of that, because I think that really shows and ties into eustress, and it shows into, okay, how we think subconsciously impacts how we act subconsciously, which impacts our reality.
Mm-hmm. Wow. That is really interesting. I find all of this really fascinating, and I appreciate you sharing, you know, both your story and also all of these really good tidbits that I think that anybody listening in, you know, it's going to make them think in a different way, even, you know, from, you know, looking at a situation and the stressful and the stress behind that situation, you know, looking and, you know, hopefully taking this as an opportunity for maybe them to sit down and think of ways in which they can look at these situations in a different manner that might make the stress feel not so burdensome. And, you know, hopefully go from there. I want to say that we are almost at time. So I do want to leave viewers with a little bit of an actionable step. So I just very quickly, don't have to take too long on this, but what steps can be taken to significantly reduce stress, both from a proactive standpoint and maybe also in the moment of that they're feeling stressed?
Yeah. So I would say, you know, following the line of thought from today is, I would start by just writing a list of every stressor and in your life right now and why you feel that way about it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, like, really go for it. Every single thing. It doesn't matter how big, how small, whatever, the whole list. And on a column to the right of it, I would invite each and every one of you to figure out what the eustress interpretation of that is. What is the flip side of that? And then, you know, once you do that, you can say, okay, well, that's the goal. That's where I want to be. And then that would be the ongoing practice of rewiring. So that's the conscious kind of presence. The ongoing practice of rewiring that belief, that immediate response would be to, next time you experience that stressor, to try to invite in the eustress interpretation that you pre-prepared, or get your phone out and look at it, you know, right? Or pull the paper out, whatever, but use that as a regular ongoing practice to try to rewire that neuro pathway. So that's one thing. And then the other thing that I would share is that, you know, one of the things that we teach at the Stress Less Company is this thing called creative stress reduction. And creative stress reduction is any activity that gets us out of fight, flight, or freeze mode and into a state of play or flow, aka rest and digest.
Mm-hmm.
And this, you know, engaging in a little bit of creative stress reduction is huge, because when we are stressed or when we're in fight, flight, or freeze mode, what happens is that the first thing that goes out the window is our critical thinking, which we need to solve the stressor, to address the stressor, right? Mm-hmm. Solve the problem. And so creative stress reduction, what it does is it gets us out of fight, flight, or freeze mode, and it gets us back into rest and digest so we can get that critical thinking back. Now, it can be different for every single person. So I want to just note that when you hear the word creative, it doesn't mean you have to be a painter or a sculptor or a musician or anything like that. It can be, you know, your creative stress reduction can be going on a walk, playing with your dog, gardening. It could be reading a book. It could be watching your favorite show on Netflix. I mean, it could be anything, but intentionally using creative stress reduction when you feel triggered is a really great way for you to get back on track, get back in the game, so that you can then go to the stressor and say, how do I get rid of this? Because it's likely many times the stressors that we're experiencing are unnecessary. Like you were sharing earlier today, you're like, that task that took 5 minutes that I've been avoiding for 3 months, you know, right? That's an unnecessary stressor. So we can go back with a clear mind, have our critical thinking, and we can say, you know what, I'm finally going to unload the dishwasher for the first time this week. I need to do that. It's driving me crazy. I'm just going to do it. Your critical thinking will be back and it'll be there to serve you.
Yes. It's just so funny how critical thinking goes out. And it's just like that thing that always brings you back to just like that. Yeah, I probably need to do this. And it stinks that it's like the first thing that leaves. You're like, I need you to come back, please. Baby, come back.
Right? 100%.
Yes. Well, this has been so helpful. I appreciate you not only sharing your expertise, but being very vulnerable today. I know that your story takes a lot of courage to share, but I know that you're sharing it to be able to benefit others and be able to share, what your experiences have been in and how you can, therefore help others. So I want to give this opportunity, the floor is yours. How can people find you? I know that, we'll provide some of this information, but if you want to say it on here too, let everybody know how they can find you.
Yeah. So first things first, I want to make sure not to forget about the free download with the symptoms and actually how you can switch from eustress to distress. And you can just visit stresslessco.com and it should pop up as a little window and you can grab that. And then I'm basically everywhere on social media at the Stress Less Co. And then the last thing I will mention is if you feel like you could use a little bit more support, if you're listening to this or you're watching this later and you're like, yeah, I need help, like rewiring these neural pathways is going to be a lot of work. And you just feel like you could use a little bit of guidance. I do offer the opportunity to apply for a complimentary stress assessment. And the way that that works is first of all, we'll talk about, what's causing the stress, the overwork, the exhaustion, all of that in your life. And I will hold energetic space for you and I'll listen deeply. And then together we will get to the root of why you haven't found the peace and the freedom that you desire yet. Yet is the key word. So if you're interested or you're feeling called for that opportunity, you can visit stresslessco.com/apply.
Perfect. No, this has been wonderful. And I thank you so much for your time, Carlee. And yes, everyone, please reach out. Carlee is brilliant at what she does and just a ray of light and just a wonderful support system. So please, I implore you, if you're feeling like you need extra help, please reach out to Carlee. Well, I hope you have a great rest of your day. And thank you so much for being here. Bye.
Thanks for having me. Bye.